The difference between an explosive athlete and one who's not is their first step. It's this initial moment that determines the entire rest of the play and whether you make it or not. So within our acceleration and that getting that first step, we need to have the best and most productive technique in order to be able to shave time off your 40s, 60s, pro agility. Literally every single thing that you need to get tested on requires your acceleration. So we're gonna dive into the acceleration mechanics. I'm gonna give you a checklist for the 3 things that you need to have locked down within your acceleration in order for you to shave 2 to 3 tenths off your second from improving your technique alone. But before we get into that, we need to know the different phases of a sprint that we have. So we have our drive phase, transition phase, and our top speed phase. And it's these 3 phases that make up the entirety of a sprint. And if we break these down, we can hammer out and figure out the exact details, technique in order to maximize that component so you're running fast and you're explosive off the line. So our drive phase, this is 0 to 10 yards. And for most athletes, this is right where we're gonna stay before we have to transition. So again, this is why we are focusing so much on the acceleration, because it is the biggest piece that'll get you the biggest results in terms of your speed development. And another reason is because the drive phase makes up anywhere from 70 to 75% of your top speed. So if you are someone who only can run 10 miles per hour, you are gonna get to 75% of that within your first 10 yards, okay? If you're running 20 miles per hour, this means you're getting 75% in your first 10 yards. It is the biggest area that leads to an increase in speed. And it is all horizontal forces. So it's all horizontal. When we get to top speed, it's more vertical, up and down, okay? Then we have our transition phase. And this is different for each and every athlete, but typically it's around 10 to 20 yards when you're doing a sprint. And we have a gradual rise of our shin and torso angles up into that 90-degree or top speed mechanics. And these 2 areas, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed this with your own kids, or maybe you filmed yourself and you've seen this when you just pop straight up, okay? If we pop straight up out the start, we are just skipping both of these and we're going straight into top speed mechanics, and that's why you're gonna be a little bit slower than you should be, okay? But when we master these 2, especially here, you are gonna get the benefit of all of this before you reach into that top speed. And the transitions, if this is 70 to 75%, we're gonna gain about 10 to 15% more and get to about 90% of our top speed. So if we can get to 90% of our top speed faster than every other athlete, we are gonna be faster, okay? And then our top speed, we have a 90-90 shin and torso angle matching. These are some of the big key points of it, so that means straight up and down. Then with our top speed phase, we wanna have a higher air time versus a longer amount of time that we spend on the ground. So that's where things like elastic strength, plyos, ankle stiffness come into play. We wanna have more air time, or what's known as flight time, during this, because we are in those vertical forces, so we're kind of floating through the air. So the fastest sprinters in the world, when they run 100 meters, they spend more time in the air than they do actually touching the ground. And this is why it's super important. And ultimately, your top speed, we're gaining the last 5 to 10%, and we're holding and maintaining and just trying not to drop off before we dip down. So these are the 3 different phases, and now we're gonna break down a checklist of the different technique that you need to have in each of the drive phase. So the big things we're gonna go over inside of the drive phase, we have our first step projection. So how we come off the blocks or how we come off the line. Then we have arm projection. So how we're using our arms to help aid our ability to get out fast. And then we have our leg projection, which is super important. So let's dive into the checklist and what you need to have locked down in order to make a very fast, explosive drive phase happen. So for our first step, when you're coming out, when you're pushing off that lead leg, we are trying to get to triple extension. So triple extension just means we're extended at the hip, knee, and ankle. So it's one big straight line and we're flexed. So this, in terms of this is my leg, right? This would be triple extension. We're pushing and extending all the way through that leg as much as possible. A lot of athletes don't get anywhere nearly close, and we're leaving behind a lot of power. Now, we need to try to get a triple extension. If we're almost there, that works as well, but the goal should be to try to get to triple extension. Now, again, we need to be moving our weight and moving everything forward, okay? So we need to have a center or a forward center of mass, okay? And all that means is that most of our weight is forward. It's forward, it's not back, because that's gonna pull us up. So a lot of people, they definitely lack some core strength, maybe some low back and glute strength, and they can't hold a very good position with their upper body, right? This 45-degree angle. So what they do to compensate is they pop straight up, okay? So we need to take care of that. You need to be able to have a very forward center of mass, and going in conjunction with that is a 45-degree shin and torso angle. So our shins need to match our torso, and they need to be at about a 45-degree angle as you project out of the start. That is going to give us the optimal projection angle in order to be fast and explosive out the start. Now, this goes along with all these others. We need to have our shoulders over our knees. Okay, so that these shoulders, when we're taking that step, we're trying to keep them over our knees. That's going to keep us that forward center of mass and keep us moving forward. Okay, we don't want to be coming up here in our drive phase, because again, we're going to skip the drive phase if we do that, go straight into transition or even top speed if we do that. And we want that 70 to 75% acceleration in that top speed by utilizing the drive phase to its fullest potential. And the last thing that you need to have during this first step is a negative step, okay? So a negative step is where we attack behind our hip, because if we are not attacking behind our hip with that first step, what happens is that our foot travels forward in front of our hip and acts as a braking force. It may be a small braking force, but every second and every amount of force and power you can develop matters when you're trying to be an elite and fast sprinter. So if our foot lands in front of our hip, there's a braking force before it travels underneath and behind our hip, then to push, okay? So we want to take that initial braking force out, that heel strike out. We want to be on the ball of our foot, and we want to hit straight back. So each step is straight back, straight back, straight back, which will allow us to add force, more speed, more speed, more speed down the way. Okay, so that's why the negative step is super critical and it has to be in this checklist. Now the next thing is our arm projection. A lot of athletes mess this up. A lot of athletes, they stay here, okay? They think they're getting faster, or they think they're pumping their arms. They say pump their arms, and it's all elbow flexion. Well, the biggest muscles we have in our upper body that are going to aid force are actually our shoulders and our lats, and we want to have an aggressive and exaggerated arm action using the shoulders and lats to come down and back. Okay, so one thing that we call it is chop the pocket. Okay, so your arms are about 90, use your shoulders and lats to do a very aggressive movement, chop the pocket back. All that force that I created there is going to travel down my legs and help aid me put more force down into the ground. So the last thing that when it comes to arm action is how it's helping manage our body, okay? If we have arm action that's coming out to the side, I'm sure you've seen this, or it's just the elbows, when we're putting force into the ground, we're running, there's a lot of rotational force, and we're trying to control that so we're not leaking force side to side. We want everything to be forward and back to produce as much force in a linear direction as possible. So that arm action should actually be helping counterbalance and counter-rotating and providing control and stability in the core. So again, you can put more force into the ground and you're not leaking force all over the place. Okay, so that is first step in arm action. The last thing we have on our checklist is our leg projection and how we want our legs to be during this drive phase. So we want a piston-like action, so it's not cyclical. It's not like a cycle where we're swooping back and coming back. We want it to be pistons, right? Pulling the leg up, punching it straight back. We want it to be very front side dominant. So front side means everything in the front part of my hip versus the back, okay? So everything that happens up here is front side. Everything that happens back this way is back side, okay? So we want it to be very front side dominant. So think of like a high knee as you're coming up and through, but we're just leaning really far forward with it. Now, one thing that's often missed is having the ability and having an aggressive thigh pull forward, okay? So, a lot of times we put a lot of force into the ground, but as soon as this leg hits, we need to use our hip flexors and aggressively rip that leg off the ground to put us in a more optimal position in order to have another negative step and project ourselves forward. So you need to rip those thighs off the ground as hard as you can, and then as soon as you feel it come up, there's a little tightness, boom, you're putting it right back into the ground. Okay, that's what we mean by aggressive thigh pulls. One thing that we use inside of the Elite Speed program, which is all a part of our Elite Athlete project, is called a thigh switch, and we have various other hip flexor strengthening drills with bands and different things like that to make that happen for our athletes. And the last thing we want is a low heel recovery, and this plays back into aiding our mechanics overall. If we are pulling our ankles up high, right, we're pulling our, so this is the ground, if we're pulling our, as we come up, if we pull our ankles up and come forward, we're wasting time coming up. We want to have a low heel recovery, so we're not wasting any time and bringing it forward and then back down. Okay, if we pull it up, we're wasting time. We're not going to gain as much ground with each step, and we're ultimately going to limit our speed overall. So these are the things that you need to have in your drive phase, the checklist you need to have in your drive phase. So we have our first step that includes triple extension, forward center of mass, 45-degree shin and torso angles, shoulders over knees, okay, and then that negative step. Now when it comes to our arm action checklist, we have chop the pocket, exaggerated and aggressive arm action using your shoulders and lats, not your elbows. And then those arms are counterbalancing that trunk rotation. And then lastly, we have our leg projection, which is piston-like action with our legs. It's very front side dominant mechanics. We have an aggressive thigh pull up, and we have a low heel recovery. If you get all of these checked in, you are going to be flying. Parents and athletes, you and I both know that speed is going to be the #1 determining factor of whether you get to go to the next level and potentially get that scholarship or not, or you get more playing time than the others or not. And we want to help make that happen for you and your athlete with all the drills, exercises, resources, training, coaching, technique review, everything that you need to help yourself or your athlete make it to that next level and get faster. So click the link below and join the Elite Athlete Project, where you can get everything that we just talked about inside the Elite Speed program, and I'll see you in there.